Hello and welcome to the revision chapter. Today we're going to try to get you from confused to confident when we're looking at tragic terminology and vocabulary. This side of the course, the tragedy side, does have a lot of Greek words, and I think it's really important that we can use them confidently and accurately. So we're going to break it down into three sections. We're going to look at the tragic trajectory and vocabulary to talk about that, which is the journey, the tragic hero, and then vocabulary we can use for the tragic response, which is how the audience is reacting and engaging with the tragedy. Then as a bonus, we're going to use these terms to talk about King Lear, which is the text that we study at my school. So let's start by looking at vocabulary we can use to talk about the tragic trajectory, which is the journey of the tragedy. So it will start with a zenith, which is the protagonist's high point. This is where they are in control, they're in power, and things are going very well for our tragic hero. And it will end up at the nadir, the lowest point of the protagonist's experience. They'll have lost their power, their social status, and ultimately mostly end in death. So along this tragic journey between those two extremes, there's a peripeteia, a moment where the fortune of the tragic hero reverses and goes from things going pretty well for him to pretty badly. There will also be, usually towards the ends of a text, a moment of anagnorisis where the tragic hero will have this moment of realization that they have caused their own tragedy, that the decisions, the mistakes they've made have brought about the suffering that they have endured within the tragic journey. So let's talk about the vocabulary we can use to talk about tragic heroes. The tragic hero will have a hamartia, a tragic flaw, an error, something about their personality or their behaviour which causes the suffering in the play. This could be hubris, which is excessive pride, where someone is so focused on their reputation, they're almost arrogant about it. And then the tragic fall is what we talk about when the protagonist goes from that position of a high point to a low point, the zenith to the nadir, on the journey of suffering, usually ending in death. The last category we need to talk about is the tragic response and vocabulary we can use to talk about the audience's engagement and reactions to this tragedy. The obvious place to start would be to talk about pathos, the pity we feel, sometimes for the tragic hero, also for those that are impacted by their poor decision making and the suffering that they cause everyone else. There's another one I want to talk about, bathos, which is not in all tragedies, but it is a good one to talk about if it is there, where it's an anticlimactic moment, but not just a general anticlimax, but one that takes it from this really intense moment of tragedy, really serious moment, to something almost absurd and ridiculous. So it's not more than comic relief, it's bathos. The most important tragic response that an audience can have, according to Aristotle, is that of catharsis, where through the journey of pity and fear we've been on watching this tragedy, we have this cathartic moment where we're purged of our emotions and almost cleansed of the emotional burden. The last one I want to talk about is nemesis, which is perhaps a bit more niche than the other ones we've looked at. And this is the sense of justice that we get within a text. So we're not looking at goodies and baddies, right and wrong nemesis. We're looking at the sense that order is restored by the good and virtuous characters being rewarded and the bad characters being punished. And within a tragedy, part of what gets us to that cathartic ending is a lack of nemesis, where a lot of the good characters have had a lot of suffering and it seems quite unjust. So although we might feel that the tragic hero deserves their ending, there have been victims along the way that have suffered more as a result. So that is our tragic terminology rundown. Now is our little bonus opportunity. And for those of you who have finished your study of King Lear, this is for you. So we're going to be applying these tragic terms to King Lear in a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but you can see how you might use them as part of your essay and your argument. So Lear's tragic trajectory is relatively straightforward from a zenith point of view. His zenith is in Act 1, Scene 1, where he is so much in control that he sets a love test to divide his kingdom. He has power, he hears these kind of sycophantic voices sucking up to him, telling him how wonderful he is. He couldn't be more in control and more powerful at that moment, but ultimately he does give it away, and that's what causes the tragic trajectory to begin. This might be controversial, but I'm going to argue that Lear's nadir, his lowest point, is when he's on the heath and he's in the storm, he's lost his power, he's been betrayed by his daughters, and he realizes that he has lost everything. And people might argue Cordelia's death is his nadir. It's fine to argue that, but from my point of view, this is his low point. So thinking about the peripeteia, this could be in Act 1, Scene 1, when he banishes Cordelia and Kent, and from then on he's lost all those honest voices around him. It could be Act 2, Scene 4, where Goneril and Regan betray Lear and diminish the knights that he's allowed and say, what need you won? The Anagnorisis, Act 5, Scene 3, he realises way too late while he's carrying in Cordelia's dead body all the errors of his ways. Looking at Lear as a tragic hero, we could talk about his hamartia, his fatal flaw, being the arrogance, being so blind to the truth that he can cut off his own kingdom and maintain power, and think that's a really great idea. We could talk about his hubris, being where he demands flattery from his daughters and banishes Cordelia when she isn't flattering enough to him and instead speaks the truth. So finally, talking about the tragic response we can talk about pathos in the madness of Lear, how it's pathetic in a pathosy way, a pathetic madness of Lear. Cordelia's death is filled with pathos, where Lear is such a different, humbled and grieving person from the man we saw in Act 1, Scene 1, and the complicated journey that it's taken for us to feel pathos for him. Thinking about Nemesis, we have to look at the injustice of Cordelia's death, where all of the bad characters, the villainous characters, the problematic characters have already died. Did Cordelia need to die on top of that when there'd already been all that suffering? It does create this deep sense of injustice and ultimately the catharsis we need for the rest of the play. This is voiced really articulately through Lear and his suffering in that beautiful, pathetic moment. Goneril, Regan, Edmund and Lear's death all make sense with Nemesis. They are the problematic characters and their suffering is somewhat deserved. It is Cordelia's injustice that makes this sense of Nemesis unbalanced. If we think about catharsis, we have to picture this scene at the end of the play, this tragic loading which is littered with dead bodies. Lear's death brings an end to all that suffering, and we have these hopeful characters left, which, I mean, it's not really rewarding the good characters, Kent and Edgar, but they get to live. And so there is, again, some sense of catharsis, some hope at the end of that play. So that is my quick summary of tragic terminology and vocabulary. I really hope you found it useful. If you could comment anything you would like me to cover in future videos, that would be very helpful. And well done for revising and getting through this video.